Where's Wesley? Good. I didn't see you, I saw Willie. No, let me explain. Willie and Wesley are an age that it's time to give them what's usually called confirmation lessons or preparation to join the church if they choose to do so when the time comes. I mean, they have to examine their own hearts and their own faith and decide whether that's right. But there are things that we need to teach them. One of the ways we're going to do this is that during this coming year, twice a month, I'll be giving sermons that are about some basic parts of Christianity, basic parts of Christian faith, things that you really need to know and understand if you're going to take the faith seriously. And this is the first one. It'll be followed up by a Sunday school, which will be sort of a sermon discussion that'll be led by Reverend Katie at 2:45. So, this is the first one, and it's about the bad news. The gospel, you may know, is a contraction of an English word, and it means the good news. And we, in the church, live in the good news so much that sometimes we forget what the good news is an answer to. And there's some things I need to tell you. When I was growing up, I used to read a lot of novels, and in novels, especially fantasy novels or great adventure novels, there's often an older figure, like Gandalf, who's wise and who knows what the world is really like and what's really going on, and who tells younger people what's really going on so they can know what the world is like. And I always wished that my father would do that for me. But it's a lot easier to do in novels than it is in real life, especially in this world where we don't always know what's really true and what's really going on. But I want to do that now. I want to give you some basic stuff that you need to know in order to grow up, be an adult, in order to be ready to join the church. The church doesn't have adult members and young members. Once you join the church, you're an adult in the eyes of the church and in the eyes of God. And as a matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, how old are you, Wesley?
I'm 14.
14? And are you 15 or 16?
15.
15. As far as I'm concerned, you guys are adults now. You're old enough that in some places in the world you could be grabbed and a gun put in your hand and stuck in a small army. That goes on sometimes in Africa. You're old enough to make a baby. That's life and death. That's life and death. It doesn't get more adult than that. Everything you're learning from now on in your life is adult learning. And as far as I'm concerned, you're an adult right now. And this is some stuff that you need to know. And the first thing is this, that death is real. That death is real. Human beings don't want that to be the case. We try to hide from it. Most religions have an idea of some sort of survival after death or escape from death or some way of believing that death isn't an end or an end to everything. And even people who aren't members of churches or specific religions often have spiritual beliefs and hopes that death is not really real. But death is real. There is a real end. I was reading a novel just this last week in which one of the characters said of the young people on her crew in this spaceship, it was a science fiction novel, she said, most of these people are too young to believe in death after life. We usually talk about believing in life after death, but in order to really know what that means and take it seriously, you have to first believe in death after life. I think that we often don't take this seriously in the church and in Christian faith. Because one of the things our faith is about is resurrection and new life. But we can't take that resurrection and that new life seriously and really understand what it means unless we understand how serious death is. How real is the threatening possibility that there will be an end and we won't be able to do anything else ever again. And we are often way too lighthearted and casual and easygoing about the idea of, okay, there's a resurrection. Okay, we'll see them again in heaven. Okay, even if I screw this life up, it's going to be all right. I'm going to get a new one. We take that too much for granted. And I don't think the Scripture does. I think there are attitudes in the Scripture that show us just how serious death is. Give me the first slide of passages. I've got just a few that I want to share. I got so many markings in my Bible today that... This is from the book of Job, chapter 16, and the 22nd verse. Job says, "For when a few years have come, I shall go the way from which I shall not return." And in many places in the Old Testament it talks about when someone dies that they sleep with their fathers or are gathered to their fathers. David says of his son who died from Bathsheba, "He will never come back to me, but I will go to him." Sleep in the Old Testament means dead. It means dead. It doesn't mean asleep like when we sleep at night. We're still conscious, we still dream, our bodies are still doing things. That's not what it means. It means dead. Ecclesiastes, in the 5th chapter, no, in the 9th chapter, verses 5 through 6 and 10. Hear what it says. "The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no more reward, and even the memory of them is lost. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished. Never again will they have any share in all that happens under the sun. So whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no work, or thought, or knowledge, or wisdom in Sheol, to which you are going." And in Matthew, in chapter 10, verse 28, Jesus says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." I think our faith is supposed to take death very seriously and not casually pretend that everything's going to be all right. It might not be. And even Jesus was sad and unhappy when he saw death in his friend Lazarus. Even Jesus was looking for whether there was another way to complete the job that he'd been given, the salvation he'd been sent to bring forth. When he sat in the garden and he prayed that this might be taken from him, that he might not have to go through this. I myself, I don't believe in the immortality of the soul. A lot of people believe that the soul, the us inside, is already immortal, that it's immortal by nature. I don't believe that. And I don't believe in survival after death. Some sort of a, you die and it's like passing through a doorway. I don't believe in that either. I believe that when we die dead. We're done. We're ended. But I also believe in the resurrection of the dead. I believe that people who really are, truly are dead, stopped, ended, are also raised again and made new by God in Christ. But that's a much different thing than if we were immortal souls who were going to continue forever anyway, and all that death was a doorway. I don't think Christian faith taken rightly treats death as a mere doorway, but as a real end with a real resurrection. Now I must warn you that I'm in the minority among theologians about that. Probably only 3 to 5% of all theologians think about death and the resurrection the way I just told you. But that's my best thought, and I think it's probably correct, even if it's in the minority, But you need to know, and I need to be honest with you, that most theologians have had a different opinion. But even some of the ancient ones believe this. Gregory of Nazianzus preached this way too. So first, death is real. Second, you can't change the past. You can't change the past. So whenever you do something, and you've done it, and now it's fixed in time, because now it's part of the past, it's there. It's real. It's part of the past, and nothing will ever undo it. God may bring good out of it. God might change the future in order to compensate for it. God might do something so new and so wonderful that you'll be able to endure the memory of the past. But you won't change it. Nothing changes the past. If you set off an atomic bomb, this incredible power, none of the explosion goes into the past. It's like the past is an impenetrable wall. And God takes the past seriously. And notice, in all these stories of what God has done, we don't have any stories where God goes back and changes the past. He accepts what happened and deals with that going forward. He doesn't go back and undo the fall. Here's another chance. All right, you died at that point in the game, but we're going to go back to your last save point, just before you ate the fruit in the garden. That's not the way God does it. He says, okay, going forward now, we're going to have a new way. Jesus, when he is raised from the dead, I'm going to give you a passage now from, give me the next slide, from John. In the 20th chapter, verses 26 through 27. This is after the resurrection, when the disciples are still sharing stories about some who have met Jesus and some who haven't met him yet. It says, a week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them, who hadn't been with them the last time. And although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And then he said to Thomas, here, put your finger in here and see my hands, and reach out your hand and put it in my side, and do not doubt, but believe. In the resurrection, Jesus still has the wounds of the crucifixion. The past of the crucifixion is not undone. It's not wiped out. The past is the past, and it's not going to be changed. So that Jesus is forever the one who died and was raised again. We are forever redeemed sinners. We don't get to somehow go back to the beginning and be people who never did anything wrong in the first place. All those sins are written on the face of history. And God will change us going forward in the day of resurrection. But God is not going to wipe out the past. Maybe it's hard to take that seriously now. But if you live long enough, the day will come when you'll do something so stupid or so terrible or so unloving that you'll wish to God you'd never done it. That you'll wish that somehow there was a way you could go back in time and never have done that. And the realization that you're stuck with it. And that what you've done is forever a part of what life is. Can be terrifying. There's some hope to go with this, and I'm not going to dwell on it, just let you know about it, and that is that the future is not fixed. And the future cannot be bound. And all of the evil and the wickedness of the past cannot stop God from doing good in the future. The future is always open. You can't tie it down. The most you can do is increase the probability that a certain thing will happen. But the future is always open. And the last thing I need to tell you is that things are pretty screwed up around here. I'm not just trying to be comical or anything. We live in a world that is a screwed up mess. It's full of evil and wickedness. It's full of hatred. It's full of murder, racism. It's been like this through most of human history, but it's still like this. It's sometimes hard for us here in America to realize that because we mostly live in this little bubble of safety, or of relative safety. But it wasn't long ago, between 1939 and 1945, when during the Second World War the Germans put 12 million people to death in camps, like it was a business or a machinery. And the rest of the war killed a total of 60 million people altogether. And some of them in really nasty ways. And wars have continued since then, and even in the few years you've been alive, there have been a whole bunch of small little wars. We say small little wars because the historians among us remember World War II. But if every human life is of infinite value, then no war is small. And there's viciousness and hatred like you would hardly believe spread throughout the world. You only have to look at the mess in the Middle East, or the mess in, is it Myanmar right now? Where there's a group of Muslim tribes that Myanmar says, no, they don't really exist. They're not even part of this country. And they are putting them in refugee camps and treating them so badly that some of them are dying of hunger and being pushed back over into Bangladesh, which is a Muslim country. It's even still messed up here, in this country that's mostly a bubble of safety. Ask Haiti how much racism and wickedness attached to that there still is pervading this country. How black people are mistreated, something awful. And not too long ago, Asian people were treated pretty badly too in this country. There's a lot of murder around here. We have a ferocious murder rate in this country. Worse yet, as a symptom of the fact that things are screwed up, and not just things, the things that are screwed up come from people being screwed up, more people commit suicide every year than are murdered. 2 years ago in the United States, there were about 36,000 murders. There were 48,000 suicides. You're more likely to kill yourself than anyone is likely to kill you. What does that say about how frightening and discouraging and unhappy life can be? Look at our politics right now. Once upon a time in this country, there were people who would say when running for office, my opponent is wrong, and he's making a bad mistake. And if you elect him, he's going to screw things up. But he intends well. I know that he intends well for our country and wants to do what's right and what will make people happy and make us all relatively well off. But he's wrong about how to do it, and so you should elect me as well. 40, 50 years ago, when I was your age, I heard candidates for public office talk like that about one another. You won't hear that now. You won't hear that in our politics now. It's become very polarized. And everybody says, look, our opponents are not just wrong, they're wicked, they're nasty, they're vicious, they're on the other side, they're on the side of evil. They're trying to steal your freedom, they're trying to steal your property. It happens on both sides. It happens on both sides. I think it's a little more prevalent on one side than the other, but it happens on both sides. I'm sorry to tell you this, but human beings as a group are not very good to one another. When I was at Mount Airy and was the minister there, we had a little preschool up in our one-room schoolhouse that we used for Sunday school. And so on Wednesdays, during preschool, I would go up there and have 15 minutes to just tell them a Bible story, because it was a church preschool. And I alternated. One year I'd tell them New Testament stories, and the other year I'd tell them Old Testament stories. So one day, I came back down from telling stories, and this is a church in the country, out in the middle of the country. There's a dairy farm right across the road from the church. And people frequently stop there to take pictures of the church or just to take a break. So I come back from telling a story. There's a guy parked in the parking lot, so I stop and just say hi, partly to check on what's going on. And he says hi. He says, I'm just, I'm an insurance salesman. I've got another appointment, but I got 15 minutes to kill. This is a quiet place. I wanted to stay here because sometimes my job, has a lot of stress and difficulty, and this is a nice place to rest. And I said, well, you're welcome. I said, by the way, the church is unlocked. If you need to use the restroom, you can go right do that. We kept the church unlocked. That's how far out in the country we were. And I said to him, I go up and tell Bible stories at our preschool. I said, and today I was telling the Old Testament story, and I told them the story of Cain and Abel. And I did it without thinking, because it's one of the Bible stories about the way things began. But I realized that here are these kids, they're 4 and 5. I might have been the first adult to really, truly try to tell them that this world is the kind of place where people kill one another. And not just strangers, these were brothers. These were people who should have loved one another. And the insurance guy threw his hands up and said, all right, he said, I give. Your job is harder than mine. The world's a screwed up mess. Even if you seem to be in a good place, in a safe home, with a good school, and no one's trying to shoot you right now. The world's a screwed up mess. This is one of the things our faith is about, how to deal with that. Why it's a screwed up mess, and how we Christians should work on fixing it and should learn to live with it. We're not the only people who have noticed this. Even people who don't believe in anything have noticed the world is a screwed up mess. And other religions have noticed it too. In Buddhism, the first noble truth of Buddhism is this: life is suffering and sorrow. Life is suffering and sorrow. That's the first noble truth. We're not the only people who've noticed this. I want you to know these things because a Christian faith that doesn't look square in the face of all this that is wrong, of how serious and real death is, of how the past can't be changed, that doesn't look plainly at how screwed up the world is soft Christianity. I sometimes call it candy-coated Christianity. It's not the real depth of faith that we're supposed to have. Those of us who follow Jesus Christ in faith and hope and trust are called to be the people who are trying to help make a difference in all this mess. Amen.